Hello, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable on Metaverse fashion. Today, we're hosted by MA Innovation Management at Central St. Martin's University of the Arts, London. My name is Mimi Nguyen, Associate Lecturer in the course. And for those of you who don't know, MA Innovation Management is a course that works with students who are passionate about developing creative strategies to drive innovation and transformative change in an uncertain world. And some housekeeping before I introduce our guests. Do drop any questions in the YouTube chat and we'll get back to you in the Q&A session at the end of the event. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panel today. We're very lucky to have you with us. First, we have Addie Wagenknecht, Head of Web3 at Algorand Foundation. Ramona Tudosescu, Innovation Lab at Farfetch. Marchesi, Chief Technology Officer at the Fabricant. Beata Wilczek, Head of Impact. Right now, you were Head of Digital Sustainability before, so Head of Impact right now at the Dematerialised. And Amon, Kale, MA Fashion Tutor at our Central St. Martin's. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the first question to everyone gathered here. Very open, very basic. How is blockchain changing the fashion industry? Who wants to go first?
Should I break the ice? Okay, yeah. Just in 30 seconds, I think it's going to change a lot, and the opportunity is big for everyone. Of course, fashion, it means fashion and digital fashion, particularly for us, means identity, and blockchain means ownership. So the two things, they're going to be empower each other. And so definitely the opportunity is really big for the future to really be able to create an entire ecosystem where people can own for real the fashion creation that they create, and also that they trade, that they sell, that they buy. So it's really big.
So I have a question actually, because so you mentioned like it's going to be big, but like we're seeing now adoption of fashion, in terms of ownership or like buying assets that are more aimed for metaverse. Is it going to be also adapted to kind of outside metaverse, kind of just the digital world that we are kind of having, Instagram, Zoom, anything that we're operating now?
I mean, I think you can even go a step further than that. I think it's going to has huge applicability in the physical world as well. I mean, a lot of the work that I do at the university is around digital design and how we can incorporate that, in various ways with blockchain. But the work outside that I do is a lot of supply chain management. And it's like, how do you get things from one place to another? How do you keep it traceable? And, there's a very interesting business case to be made for it as well as a sustainability and ethical case. So I think, there's a huge amount that blockchain is going to revolutionize in fashion. From the bottom up, it will be every aspect is going to be changed by it. And as we're entering like a new digital kind of fashion arena, it's blockchain native, which is different, but both are going to be revolutionized.
So, okay, let's dig into that. As there was a case, and I mentioned that in the previous panels when we had Verisart and Sotheby's, I think we talked through the Hermes bag. And, there was this case with this Hermes NFTs and people suing each other. Hello. And how can we apply then blockchain for traceability of luxury goods that, we're always trying to like prove the authenticity of, the bags. How would that work?
I mean, a lot of projects right now are looking at how you authenticate utilizing the blockchain. And to some extent, when we see blockchains and NFTs, we're using those as essentially a decentralized, centralized kind of consensus among how we authenticate goods and how we track those. So one of the kind of value props of blockchains for authentication, specifically around luxury items, is that it controls through the transparency and kind of lack of, there's more kind of transparency around who's owned it and who's transferred it, and that rights and ownerships and how that's transferred through owner to owner or through, exhibitions or loans. And so you can see the entire kind of lifespan of that good to some extent, and how and where that authentication has been sort of carried out, I think is quite an interesting, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but it's one of the kind of first use cases that I thought was quite interesting, is approaching kind of luxury goods or using QR codes to authenticate them using the metadata on chain, and sort of how that changes. For example, I'm really interested in bootlegs, and I'm really interested in fantasy wear and sort of these iterations of the authentic, like, real items, and how that will then possibly generate sort of this additional secondary market is something that I'm quite interested to see how that sort of starts to form and develop, and especially in the context of fashion and sort of physical goods that can transfer within and outside of these meta spaces.
I have an example. So I was just today in a gallery of generative art, and there was a work of one of the artists that I'm following. So he's selling NFTs. Now we're kind of sidewaying from fashion, but just to give a case and an example. I didn't really understand what's happening. So I'm kind of buying his NFTs, but the gallery was showcasing a physical work of one of these NFTs. And I was like, I really like this one. And I did speak to him about that. And he said, I can't sell it to you because someone already bought it. I was like, but I'm seeing it in the gallery right now. And I asked the owner, I was like, is that your NFT? Are you the buyer that, he said that already bought it? He's like, no, I don't. I just have the physical piece. I printed it out. And do you want to buy it? And I was like, but someone already owns the NFT. He's like, yeah, but that's an NFT. I'm just selling the physical work. And if you want to buy it, I can also give you a certificate that is signed by the artist digitally. And for me, it was like, how? So now there are two works that live separately. But then on the other side of the wall, she had a different piece. And I was like, is this one sold? And she was like, oh, if you buy this one, you'll get an NFT together as well, which for me makes sense. Like, if you buy this Hermes bag and then there is an NFT provenance tracking. So if I sell it to someone, I would possibly have to sell the NFT as well. And then we can track, where is the bag, who is owning it right now. But with this art piece, it was so confusing for me, because how come someone else can own the NFT, but I can still yet buy a physical piece signed by the artist? I don't know, have you seen any examples of that?
Was the physical piece identical to the work that was being?
Yeah, it was just that work printed out, and that the case. When I spoke to one of the swagger companies as well, so they are creating now a fashion brand for the Copenhagen Fashion Week. So they having QR codes in the tag that you can track. Where is the T-shirt? Let's say with the NFTs, but then there is another second NFTs that is only working. I don't know exactly how it works when it's next to the piece. So then you make sure that the piece is tracking geographically also the NFT of the piece. Have you heard about the solution?
Yeah, I mean, there are many solutions. For example, now the idea is the marketplace should kind of start to recognize pieces that are already there. So it's also a problem that is connected with the ability to reproduce and duplicate the same piece on a different NFT. Nothing prevents to do that. The blockchain, it doesn't control the content that is linked to the metadata to the NFT. So it's a broad, if you think about, you can sell and buy prints of famous masterpiece, and you make money on that, even if you don't own the actual real piece, the original one. So I think there is a whole variety of situations. As an artist, I think the artist should be kind of free to set what exactly want to sell, and ideally but the NFT is still the kind of the authentication that is needed to tell, okay, if you want this is actually the value is only on this piece, so on the NFT. So the NFT transactions are the only one that really certificate the ownership. The rest is just basically representation of the work, and you can still sell. There is nothing they prevent to do that. So really, yeah, it's of course interesting but it's not something new, because I always remember where there were people selling a piece of moon with a certification. They will actually own that piece of moon, but no one can certify that, because you cannot go to the moon and tell, okay, this is my piece of land. But actually, there were people serious on that. So I think about certification is, and when you buy land, no one actually tell you that historically you own that land, because a nation can tell, no, it's actually my land. I mean, imagine the United States. This is a century-old problem, but still there are certificates. They tell you, I'm the owner, you are the owner of this land. So it's a contract, actually in this case is the smart contract, is actually the only piece that is agreed by a certain amount of people. They tell who is owning that, but it's never enough. There always be a way to bypass this kind of certification, and this is kind of the limitation of blockchain in general.
If I could add to that, or maybe kind of round up what we are trying to say in answer to this question, I think that on one hand, we have, a lot of kind of data coming to forefront. And Amon, this is something you were saying, that there's basically data that was obscured in fashion is now coming to the forefront. So there's this kind of hope or claims for transparency. But on the other hand, we have all those new different forms of co-creation, ownership, and now it's also a lot of questions about IP. So those two spheres are very, very much affected. But to me, it's quite fascinating that, we will be soon combining them, because I don't see that much of this kind of transparency thinking. But on the other hand, what is the original copy kind of thinking kind of coming together? Or at least I don't know that many case studies myself about it, but it shows how new it is and how vital it is and vibrant. So many things are shaping and forming. So I think we will be having a lot of conversations, how things coexist together. In case of artwork, somehow the debate about digitals is not as strong as it is in fashion. So I think maybe this is also something we could focus a little bit on, how something, can exist in both worlds, and can it be one thing or is it two things? So these are almost like ontological questions that in next, few years, there will be a lot of traction to answer them. Addie, I think you wanted to also add something.
I was going to add something along the lines of sort of that one of the things is, so I come from a pretty extensive background of the traditional art world and exhibitions and institutional sort of viability of works, and how I have to present my works in the context of museum acquisitions or institutional acquisitions or collector acquisitions. And sort of there's, through the lineage of the commercial art world, there's been sort of a more or less sort of consensus among established galleries that there's a specific kind of protocol that's laid out in terms of when a work is sold, you receive the certificate of authenticity. There's certain information on that. There's a maintenance manual, there's a troubleshooting manual, installation manual, sort of best installation wishes for the artist, like all of these sort of things that are expectations when you acquire a work. And I've been working with a lot of the NFT marketplaces, and to some extent starting to work with some of the metaverse spaces, and sort of looking at how then do we bridge this question of sort of this orthogonal aspect of like, we have the physical work and the digital work, and they have to live in parallel to some extent, and they're not necessarily exclusive to each other. So the question is like, okay, well, what's the best practices of authenticating a work that is an AR work that also could be lived, in a physical space? So in this specific example of this work that's in the gallery, where there's a physical work that's being sold separate from the NFT, my inclination would be that if I had to extract how that looks like from a pipeline, supply chain, gallery side of things, it's that the COA for the physical work probably specifies that it's a physical work, and then the NFT work might say this is an NFT, edition of a physical work, and so they look at it through an editioning or a series kind of relationship versus it being one or the other. And for some artists, that practice is sort of okay, there's a physical work and an edition that is virtual, and they live actually as one edition. So I've been really wanting to see across the board sort of one of the challenges with blockchain is like that it's highly decentralized, but finding a central kind of consensus among people that are developing works within blockchain spaces that is best practices. So like, how do we verify the work? How does that valuation or that authentication live if it's like online versus off? And if they're, parallel spaces, how do we deal with that sort of complexity? And there's not necessarily those models in existence. So to some extent, I think it's our prerogative or maybe some of our agendas to sort of start building those out.
I think the currency by Damien Hirst was a good example. Like you choose one or the other. You choose the physical artwork or you choose the NFT and you can burn one or the other. I think it's actually on spot because the artists decide you cannot have both of them. You need to really decide what you want. Of course, it's not applicable to everything. But in this case, it was really raising the question perfectly.
I mean, I come from a more fashion background, but digital twinning of physical goods by luxury houses is already happening. So, I mean, I think it's already kind of been said, but I just see it as additioning, really. Right. I think there are issues with authentication. I totally understand that. But I don't think this is a newer space that galleries have to operate in. I think it's something that's, established and it's just kind of moving certain elements that they've been doing in other systems to like a more of a blockchain. Like there's a lot of supply chain and CRM services that you can use, but just move it all to the blockchain eventually.
We sideways a bit to NFTs a lot. And I think, okay, so we have now, let's say this conversation about either the NFTs attached to the physical artwork or not, or is it an addition, like the second digital edition? And then, we can still move around in the system, the physical. What about fashion? So a lot of things that, we can purchase right now in fashion, let's say the Nike drop. It's a digital thing. I don't have the sneakers as a physical thing. Do you see that, one day we will have these editions as a physical things? There are a lot of like amazing, the Fabricant pieces that I just like really want to buy, but I also want to wear them.
You can wear, but only in AR.
I know, but I want to wear for
We will never do the physical one.
I'd like to come to CSM one day and like this colorful Fabricant thing. So yeah, so how is that in Ramona? Do you see these physical pieces kind of coming soon?
Yeah, so actually, like what I'm most excited about in the evolution of fashion is that it's becoming much more fluid. And there's not this split between real and physical, but it's all about how does a modern creative economy exist in the new real? We talk a lot in Farfetch about the new real, all of it is still reality. It's not about splitting online, offline, IRL, URL, digital, physical. It's about everything that can come in this new real that is more fluid. Just as fashion has always been about enabling people to express their identity. And their identity, as it's evolving, it is my physical self, it is my augmented self, it is my virtual selves and avatars. That means that fashion has to as well evolve into sustaining that identity expression in its different forms. And when I try to kind of clarify the way that the opportunity is right now, is that I go through a very simple explanation. I think fashion will be physical only, virtual only. They can be real fashion influencing virtual fashion, and also virtual fashion influencing real fashion. And these 4 different opportunities, they come with a lot of different explorations, and some of them tackle virtual only fashion. It tackles a number of expression mechanics such as escapism and things that are never possible in the physical world. But if we look at the fashion industry, it has started with basically taking real fashion into virtual fashion and doing digital twins and giving higher accessibility to real life products. But then new creators came along and they were like, we're not going to just reproduce reality. What if we completely design something new? And what if we design virtually first before we go into physical production? So collaboration and all of the like managing overproduction through more collaborative virtual creation before it goes into physical production is also something that we don't talk so much about it, but for me, it's one of the most exciting elements of metaverse fashion, being virtual only inspiring physical one, and also looking at the gaming worlds and the gaming IP to be brought into physical experiences, and kind of fashion being redefined into new product categories that we haven't seen so far when it comes from the catwalk. So yeah, that's kind of like my view on like the opportunity of the space.
Why did fashion adopted blockchain so fast? So, I mean, I was just thinking that, there are conversations about music, but music is like the first thing that would make sense in terms of something that we are consuming digitally already. So there's kind of like, and then we're already talking a lot about like ownership of IP in terms of songs, like, can you use that later in movies? So it just makes so much sense. However, fashion, which is way more complex because of this physical element of that, adopted blockchain way faster than the industry.
Maybe I can start with this one. I think when you ask this question, I'm thinking like, is really music that late to adoption? And I think, and should we even think about it this way? Because to me, I remember when I was first reading about DAOs, there were music DAOs, and I was thinking, where are the fashion DAOs? Where are they? Like 1.5 years ago. There are amazing people like Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst that are working with fashion, blockchain, AI, and thinking how to work with it. And I was thinking like, where are kind of, not like big corporations and big brands doing that in fashion? Because obviously now we see this wave of Web3 or dedicated to metaverse kind of, massive projects or groups of people being hired. And I'm really hoping to see, more and more kind of interdisciplinary collaboration. So music and fashion coming together, because this is an amazing potential. At Dematerialised, we're an NFT marketplace for fashion and virtual goods. For example, we had a drip yesterday with Teflon Saga, who is a metaverse, I think, trueborn. I think we address him like that. So he's a musician, but he's a metaverse only musician. And it's very much working. And we saw a lot of, Justin Bieber or Ariana Grande also embracing what that potentially means at the moment now to be in the metaverse. There was a great collaboration at Metaverse Fashion Week between Ouroboros and Grimes. So I think there's plenty, but to me, there's plenty happening, and I think there should be much more intersection in those spaces. And I'm hoping for more of that, because music has this amazing potential of being in contact with community very immediately, which fashion before Discord very much lacked. So I think music is a great space, and I'm just hoping to see more of a crossover between two.
I think there is a good use case about funding music rather than just split the revenue, for example, the IP. It's something that is happening with movies now. There are many movie funding around the NFTs. So the directors, the producers, they create campaign to make a crowdfunding based on NFT. Is something really stronger than actually the revenue. Probably one of the reasons I see on music is probably the fact that the revenue is getting way less than, 20 years ago. There is no physical support anymore. All the digital streaming really erode a lot of the revenue compared to 20 years ago. So now probably music is become more conservative on trying different ways, while the visual industry is always more aggressive to try new things. And you see it's 99% probably now is visual of the NFTs, and the less is way less on other use cases where actually the opportunity is big as well.
I mean, just adding to that, who owns their music anymore? Well, I don't. I mean, who doesn't use Spotify or Apple Music? I mean, it's not in the vested interest of any of these companies to transfer ownership back to us. Right, they have us in subscription models. That doesn't exist in fashion, right? I mean, it does, but it's astonishingly small part of the market. right? And they've been trying to do rental for years, and it's never taken off. So I think that's the reason, right? And ultimately, there's actually not that much competition in music anymore. And even though we have massive conglomerates in fashion, there's still more competition between the big three.
Yeah, I agree. So it comes back to kind of the notion of ownership. It's exactly like Amon, you just said, like, because in fashion we do, or in art, in the art, contemporary art world, we do care about like who is owning the piece, who can claim the piece, or like hang it on the wall. So again, like if we're talking about let's say the collectors, so when you ask like who owns that, because why I'm talking about music is like I know a lot of NFT collectors, but I don't think any of the people that I know actually ever bought a music NFT or like a sound audio kind of based thing. So in terms of adoption, I kind of meant like kind of the demand from the collectors point of view. But then when I'm thinking about collectors as well, a lot of questions that we're getting from the students as well, and then from the collectors, is this sustainability concern. So I wanted to also pitch that topic to you. I do ask this question at every single panel, but I think it would be just interesting to find like how is your stance about all the headlines that we're just hearing, like how terrible is this minting this stuff. Addie, you're from Algoround, so you'll have the best kind of.
When you ask that question, you're referring specifically to different types of blockchain mechanisms, or in terms of how it's affecting fashion and sort of the supply chains that are integrated with that?
No, I'm mentioning more like if you now want to speak to people who want to enter the space, and a lot of my students are like, one of the biggest concerns that I don't want to do block Web3 fashion, or I don't want to mint stuff, is this the headlines that they're reading about like how bad it is to be in this space, just for the fact that you are minting artworks or fashion works on it.
Yeah, I mean the short answer is that there's two sort of primary consensus mechanisms behind blockchains, and when people speak to the environmental concerns, they're typically thinking of Ethereum or Bitcoin. And so those are a proof of work consensus mechanism. And then there's something called proof of stake. And proof of stake is much more energy efficient in terms of how the next block is created. And sort of the consensus mechanisms that are built out to define those blocks is extremely energy efficient. So one of the misconceptions around blockchain is when people say blockchain or cryptocurrency, they're like, oh, well, that's Bitcoin or Ethereum, without realizing that there's hundreds of other really viable, quite robust chains with billions to some extent, almost trillions locked into those chains that are proof of stake. So if you look at things like, obviously Algorand is one, but there's things like Solana or Tezos or Cardano or Polkadot, Kusama, Avalanche. I mean, there's quite a few in the top 100 that are really viable and have a lot of sort of parameter conventions and standardizations for NFTs and secondary markets and metaverses and gaming that I think are viable options beyond just sort of Ethereum. And unfortunately, Ethereum was sort of the first mover in the space, so everyone thinks that that's the only option, but there's actually quite a lot out there. If that's a concern to look at, it's just about sort of educating yourself and realizing that there's more than just sort of the clickbait on the front page.
But then why the main kind of NFTs that are being sold are still on Ethereum? So if you look at the latest Sotheby's auction, it's Ethereum still. A lot of big artists, like all of the names that we're mentioning, Grimes, they were minting on Ethereum. And, if you see the kind of first movers, as you said, they are minting on Ethereum, but yes, there is a growing, let's say, Tezos crowd of, especially generative art. But even in fashion, I see, like, the Nike drop, that was Ethereum. So why we still on this Ethereum if there are so many, you just listed so many proof of stake protocols?
So my theory around that is because Ethereum essentially kind of developed and defined the standardization protocols for NFTs about 2 years ahead of the rest of the chains. So they've developed, in terms of maturity and primary and secondary markets, wallets, how the works are stored. Obviously, like marketplaces from a consumer standpoint or a user standpoint, that's always the first places people look. So they go to like OpenSea or they go to Foundations or Nifty, and those were all ETH based, unfortunately. And a lot of the artists that have been in the auctions or in those spaces have been quite interested in the secondary sales, because the way that the smart contracts are written, you essentially can delineate royalties as an artist. So with each secondary sale, those artists receive a return on that additional price of 10 to 50%, for example. And so I think to some extent they've just had that runway more than other chains have. With Tezos or Algorand or Cardano or Solano, they've all just been really developed in the last 6 months to year in terms of those alternatives. And so they're definitely growing in terms of total, market cap and users, and sort of, I think the creative teams and groups, especially on things like Tezos and Algorand, have been really exploding in the last year, but they're just slightly behind. But that, that growth rate isn't linear. It's like definitely skyrocketing in terms of people wanting those options and realizing that Ethereum isn't sustainable, whether it be because of the accessibility of it, because gas is super expensive and you're paying $50 to $500 to mint an image. With proof of stake chains, you're looking at a penny or 5 cents or a half a penny, depending on the price of the token. So I think to some extent, like those migrations and those options are starting to look more viable and more interesting as those kind of spaces evolve and there's more infrastructure in place.
If I can add on this, of course, as a company, part of our mission is to be sustainable. So the reason why we are purely digital on fashion is because of that. And also, we choose a flawless blockchain because it's sustainable as well. I agree. I agree on the fact that Ethereum would probably. I think what I like to see is the analogy with countries. So like you choose a country rather than another one, even if maybe it's more painful or more expensive to be there. Ethereum for collectors and artists means a history of iconical artwork. And there are many people, many artists and collectors, they don't say, I know Tezos is cool, but I don't want to go there because Ethereum for me is the place to stay. So they rather prefer to wait for Ethereum 2.0 rather than jump into a new blockchain. It's fair enough, but of course, if you think about the mass of people and not just the usual group of people, crypto natives, is the scenario is way different. So we see Solana is really rising quickly. This summer is really like half of the volume of Ethereum right now. But the average cost of each NFT is way, way less. So it's a completely different audience. So people, they don't expect to spend $10,000 or $20,000 on a digital garment. They want a reasonable, cheap digital asset that they are able to purchase. So I think the variety is good. For sure, I don't see a future where there will be not sustainable blockchains, but definitely me personally, I'm super happy to have variety of blockchains rather than an entire monolithic, big brother blockchain decentralized for everyone. I prefer to have a variety of opinion on culture, because Ethereum as well is a culture. It's not just a technological kind of infrastructure. It's really has its own identity. I think it's good to have this kind of difference in the future.
I think
sorry, Amon.
No, I was going to say, I think you've already hit on it, which is, people migrate to things where there's a lot of community already. I think the good thing is that, when you have artsy communities on the fringe, they tend to get gentrified. So we're going to have a gentrification of the other coins. It's just going to take a while, right? Who wanted to live in East London 30 years ago?
Right.
And now it's $500,000 for a basement flat in East London.
Yep.
I also adding to that, I think it's a question of time, because when things are new, they also need time for maturity and adoption. We definitely need education. I'm very often asked the question that you posed, Mimi. So I usually say it's all about the proof of stake, that there are different blockchains, that it's about energy efficiency. And I think it's also our work to educate communities and people, and particularly those are rightfully critical and have questions. And I think it's very important to talk particularly to them. So I think there's still a lot of work to inform. I think, to me, this is the main reason. The Dematerialised operates on Luxo blockchain, which is a proof of stake blockchain. So again, it's one of the most environmentally friendly, to use that horrible phrase, in that sense, because it's energy efficient. But when we talk about sustainability, I would urge everyone to just not mush it into energy consumption, because it's not only environmental sustainability. With digital fashion, there's also cultural sustainability that is at stake. Who gets access, who doesn't. So I think if we unpack this word, I think there's much more other things than just energy consumption. I know this is one of the main topic, one of the point of concerns. If anybody is interested in that and would like to know more, there's a very nice report that came out from, Crypto Carbon Rating Institute. They're from Munich, and it came out last month. So it's a very cool PDF that's available for free everywhere. So they outline it pretty well, and they tell what's the difference. There's also nice visual charts, what's the difference between one and another, meaning proof of work and proof of stake. So I think it's great. But I would really urge everyone to also think about sustainability from a kind of more broader perspective, and kind of, thinking about social sustainability as well. I think, to me, I think we sometimes kind of narrow down this conversation because of those headlines that you mentioned. So this is an important conversation to have, but there's also, more stuff going on.
Yeah, I know, but this question just keeps coming back. So we had this panel, it was the third panel already, and I saw this question on YouTube. It's we already covered that in December, because we had Arthur Brightman from Tezos coming and explaining really the proof of stake. But people are coming back and be oh, but this is so bad for the planet. But in terms of fashion, what I really find it so fascinating is that instead of buying another piece of cloth, there is a hope that we're just going to consume these digital pieces, and then I'll just buy less, and that's the most sustainable point that I can make. And then all of these COVID promises, this year I will not buy any piece of clothing. It could be true, because I'll just buy a lot of digital stuff. But you guys also mentioned, Marco mentioned, the collectors, right? We have a lot of Ethereum collectors that just don't want to move to Tez. And I also think that it's not just education, but it's also, so far, the user experience that we're having. It's just very difficult to learn about it, because there's a lot of jargon coming on. So when you start to see proof of stake, proof of work, people just get confused. And then to move from Ethereum to Tezos, it was quite difficult, because you would basically start buying kind of this layer one things, and then to change that you have to go to exchange, move from your wallet, and then move to Bitcoin, and then from Bitcoin to Tezos. It was such a long and stressful process that I just don't even know if how much gas I lost on the way, and is this money even going ever back to me? So I guess that unless we somehow make it so user friendly and intuitive for everyone to just go, and I'm just imagining, let's say if my mom wants to enter a digital fashion space, so instead of going to a Burberry shop, she'll be I'm just going to buy something, a digital fashion piece. She has no clue how to start, and I think it's now still a bit targeted towards kind of a more tech-savvy crowd. And I really want to see this mass adoption, when actually you could see aunties, moms, uncles, everyone kind of be participating in the space. How do you think, when would be the moment when, this adoption, or this kind of more user-friendly moment will arrive?
I would just say, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I would just say that Dematerialised, we're doing everything we can to make it very easy. Many of people who bought digital fashion NFTs on Demat, this is their first NFT they ever bought. There's a kind of a lot of people coming, particularly from fashion only, so not gamers, not crypto natives. It's very easy. One of the kind of, I think, access points is that you can pay with fiat, so you can buy with euro, you can buy with dollars. So I think, any mom or grandma that manages to buy something online is also able to buy that NFT. What she's going to do about it later, that's another question. What's the reasoning behind it, and how she defines digital ownership and what to do with it. But I think there are many things in the working now that makes it pretty accessible and available. And it doesn't always have to be that complicated, but definitely that's a very important, thing to focus on.
I can add on this. I mean, the math, you made an amazing job on facilitate and reduce friction for sure. Us too, we are trying really to improve the user experience and make it super seamless. There are payments, for example. There is way to access the utility. I mean, there are so many aspects that needs to be improved. It is even difficult to kind of make a list of things. Definitely, the technology, yes, is still a big unknown. I mean, no blockchain is really as seamless as just going to Visa circuit and just buy something. If you think about, if you go to Amazon right now, you just buy now, in literally 5 seconds you are buying something. There is nothing comparable on any marketplace right now, and it's actually what people expect, because now Amazon is the standard when you purchase something. Even the KYC, there are many wallets. If you want to get the cryptocurrency, you need to authenticate with a passport. It's crazy. You don't go and buy, I don't know, a washing machine and they ask you for your passport. Nowhere. So we are really so much back in time on this user experience that there is so much that we need to do.
I wanted to ask actually 2 questions, so we need to be quick for the Q&A. One is the audience. Who is the audience of the Web3 fashion? So Ramona, you have a different slightly audience because of Farfetch. Are these the same guys that bought this Balenciaga Fortnite shoes for the game? Because you can see, like, also we had with Amon in the previous panel, Andrew from Metaverse Group, the Decentraland Fashion Week guys, and he was talking about his daughter who was buying the sneakers, and she's kind of, I don't know, 13, 12, something like that. But I guess that this will be different people than Ramona, than Farfetch audience. So how do we categorize, differentiate? Like, if you are now a fashion designer and you want to enter the space, who is your target audience?
Yeah, so I think that right now, the audience is representing a subculture. The crypto NFT audience is not mainstream. It is a subculture that has its own codes, its own language, its own barriers, and it is kind of gated into this very small community, because at the scale of the possible audience of fashion, actually the audience of a Web3 fashion, digital fashion, is still quite small, and there are the representatives of these subcultures of financial freedom, creator economy, independence, and all of those principles of being more involved into what they purchase and the brands that they actually build on their own. So I would say that from the perspective of like how we define the Web3 audience, is that we're looking at that audience that wants to create and co-create. Because when we look at the audience of fashion until now, they're seen as more consumers. They're buying, they're consuming, and they're owning. But when you go into digital fashion, Web3 fashion, then you're looking at them as co-creators, as co-owners. You're looking at them as part of the story and the narrative. So all of the technologies that enable that, to put the community at heart of fashion, this is kind of the audience expectations that we're looking to tackle. And the barrier between supply and demand actually is not existing anymore, because a consumer can become a creator. And that is something that fashion has been very top down in terms of the way that it is being built, while now it's much more circular, with the community being at heart of the creation process as well as the distribution strategy. So that's how I would define a bit like the potential for now of the Web3 fashion space.
It's super interesting. I can really only speak to younger designers because that's who I deal with on a regular basis. And I've done NFT projects with fashion students and seeing like, how can you add value to whatever concept you're trying to do? How can you sell something to a consumer or a company? And we had enormous interest, like some of the largest luxury conglomerates in the world sent CEOs to Central St. Martin's to look at their work. Like, that's how interested these companies are in getting these young people to come up with really interesting ideas. But as I've kind of moved on and done other projects with other groups, I've kind of tweaked the way that I talk about it, and it's much more about like value adding now, and how do you kind of get narrative across. So I have some students who are doing amazing work. They're creating digital collections, they're creating digital accessories, they're creating AR experiences, and kind of that could be an NFT if it needs to be, or it could just be its standalone digital fashion. But also I have students who are making chat rooms to talk about issues that bother them that have to do with their collection, right? They want to spark conversations, they want to get their narrative across. And it's a brand new way of doing that. And I think limiting it to just clothing, fashion is so much more than that. And so them being able to then express themselves in a new way. I mean, I have people doing performance art and filming it, and that's like people are going to access that piece of who they are through their clothing. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how these things kind of evolve, because I think they're going to be crazier and wilder than any of us can imagine. And that's why CSM is great.
That's my last question, actually. So you led to that. What will be the next use cases, the exciting use cases that we can see?
They're insane.
How do you see the future of metaverse fashion? Where will we go?
I think I just said it, but like it's narrative structure. So it's how do you bring people into your world, right? Like I think you have established brands and they're very easily, if you think about Gucci, the world that Gucci inhabits, right? It's very evocative of a very specific kind of worldview and story. But if you're a young designer, there's only so much you can actually kind of get across when you're doing it on a runway for the first time. You're putting your clothes on a runway for the first time, and so having a new way of having web natives brought into your world is incredibly potent, and it's going to be a new way that it's interesting. I had one student who basically said, I love making clothes, but the thing that I've always really loved as well is making my artwork and my portfolios as well. They're really evocative of who I am, and I always feel like when my stuff is on a runway, it's lost. And now they're not going to have that issue, and like they're incredibly excited, and they hate computers. Like they're actively technologically avoidant to the point where they're like, I don't even like, I've never used any 3D modeling software. I have no interest in learning how to do it. I don't want to animate. They're literally animating by hand because they don't want to learn how to do it on a computer. And that this is a new way for them to, express themselves and have a response from an audience they wouldn't otherwise have.
Can I say that? I mean, making fashion design accessible to everyone is really our dream. This is what we are working on. And actually, for example, there was people that they post on LinkedIn, they are fashion designers just because they work on our platform. So they co-create there. It's amazing. It's the future. Is what I dream for my daughter, really, literally. Because I want that the next generation of designers and creative, they can really have, as it was for iPhone and YouTube, that they open an entire new world of video making. I think is something that I foresee for digital fashion as well. So not really be working on just cloth 3D or like the specific tools for fashion designer, but really you are just be creative and you can do fashion. And I think is what I really love and aiming and working to.
We can move to some questions from Q&A. I mean, they kind of link to what we spoke previously. And then maybe that's something, because both Ramona and Amon, you guys were talking about this incorporation of users, customers into the whole creative process. And then, someone is asking, any good examples of, incorporating this metaverse blockchain elements in fashion in engaging the customer and then providing, do you have like a real example of how we bring this consumer into this process?
I like Roblox and Animal Crossing. I like this example, really, video games, giving welcoming digital fashion and creators. Roblox, I think also the fact that they are working on kind of a wearable technology to make easy that, I think is super powerful. Roblox is not on blockchain, of course, it's not decentralized, but still, like, I think it's super strong on what they have done so far. And I really love that kind of way to democratize digital fashion. And even if the quality probably is not my main target, if we say that, but it's super strong. I really love that.
I agree. User-generated platforms that enable creators to be their own brands and have their micro communities, and they create for their values. Like, for example, in Sims, there is this creator, Ebonix, that is basically this Afro-American creator that is doing actually skins for her audience, and she's very true to herself. So I would definitely say that UGC gaming platforms are user-generated content focused, are enabling players to become creators and to become micro brands. And I think that evolution from you're not only playing, but you're starting to create, and then you're starting to get known and to influence your own community is what they do particularly good in these UGC games that get so much traction from the new generation.
Thank you. And I have also, this is a question more about physical shops. Will more physical shops sell physical and digital fashion for you to explore and buy in person in the future? So will we see physical shops selling digital fashion? I actually saw recently, I think. I'm not sure if I should say that, but okay, I'll say it. I was in this Philipp Plein shop, and they were selling like Philipp Plein caps, NFTs in the shop. It was kind of like a weird Web3 concept store, crypto concept store.
I was there as well.
Okay, so I'm not ashamed to say that. Will we see more examples of that?
Probably not. Nike. I expect a Nike store, Nike Town, to have this in kind of a installation exhibition there. Yeah, and then probably other Adidas, some big brands. Yeah, totally. I think they're gonna kind of host this kind of experience there. Yeah.
Yeah, and also department stores been already experimenting with that, like in Paris, at least one or two, and so that I think I think we definitely will see that. And even when you get, for example, MCQ garment, on a tag, it's say blockchain token, however it works, whatever it does. There, I think we will see probably in the next 6 months plenty of kind of, I would say, experimentations in that direction that later will consolidate it, the ones that work.
And then this is a question, maybe, it would be interesting to see, because we talked about the different audiences for physical and the digital. And then someone is actually putting a question, is it right that selling fashion on the metaverse before producing it in the physical world is a good technique to judge how popular an item would be and sell? Would it help with advertising? So first, would it help with just, manufacturing process, kind of like testing the users first and the popularity, and then would it help in advertising? So 2 questions.
Yes. Yes, I think the word for that is also virtual sampling for production. So this is the moment when digitization of fashion and bringing Clo 3D or Marvelous supports the circular efforts and making more sustainable. So definitely virtual sampling is an answer to that. And there are, for example, AI companies that are also specializing in that, that basically it's kind of, production on demand, let's say, then. And it's obviously easier to assess it. And that's already been done for last, I think, at least 2 years that those things are in the working, because obviously, it's like whoever needs to ever make a prototype, they know it's cost efficient and time consuming. So if you can remove this, and then you can also see if your community or your consumers, depending how you address them, like it or not, and are potential buyers, you're also saving a lot of resources of different sorts. So yeah, for sure.
Okay, and the following question to that: how do NFTs affect consumer brand relationship?
If it's a smart brand, it's gonna consider consumer as a community. At least this is what our view. So there are no consumers anymore. It's just a community. So the relationship is way different. It's a dialogue, it's a conversation with the community rather than saying, buy this and that's it. And this is a radical change in Web3. I think brands that they are understanding that, they are making smart moves on this field.
Okay, and then I think very basic question. I mean, you can also message me that later, because we have not only just fashion designers and artists, but also artists, painters, actors. So a lot of people that are very intrigued, curious about the space. And then there are a few questions here about, like, you know, this process to just enter in the space. It's just so complicated that it's put a lot of new users off. And do you have any recommendations for kind of working dictionary of technology terms and definitions? You know, we dropped during this talk a lot of, you know, I actually have a feeling that my students don't really know what is KYC. So, like, you know, just simple kind of cheat sheet that would be quite useful. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of confusion around terminology and meaning within fashion ecosystem in layman terms. So do you know any good sources that would, like, introduce our students into the space?
As Dematerialised, we created a glossary of very basic terms, which are currently now expanding into Glossary 2.0, the Glossary of Digital Fashion 2.0, when we will be focusing on more social impact and sustainability related terms. But we created it. And I would also say that the report that we created with Virtue, powered by Vice Media, I think that also kind of lays out certain terms in a quite accessible, in a simple way. But it's true that there's need of resources, there's need of, you know, platforms and channels, but I think there will be more and more of them. So that's also an exciting part.
Okay, I'll drop that in the description. Last question from my students, because they're graduating this year, actually next month. Addie, you were an established contemporary artist. Can you share any, you know, in hindsight, any tips for anyone who wants to, you know, graduating an art university, who wants to enter a Web3 space? Is that a good place to go after graduation?
I mean, they're very different spaces in the world. Obviously, I would say online presence is quite important. It's not necessarily that you ever have to have a technical degree to be part of a blockchain or a protocol build out. They're always looking for people who are creators and thinking 2 years ahead and not just necessarily moving with the masses. So in terms of creative thinkers and sort of makers, I would say that there's a huge value add that you can bring to those spaces, because so many people are so MBA sort of computer science oriented that they don't have this future possible kind of outlook. And that's something that a lot of people in spaces can't necessarily buy. So there's a lot of value in bringing that to a company.
I would recommend to join communities on Discord, on Twitter, follow really like nice, good project that they rely on the same value on that they are really, there are many, they're really cool. So not just us, but really Demath and Algoround, so many community and projects that are really, they are making a difference, because this is, and ask questions. No one, everyone is a newbie, everyone is an expert here. So it's really like, we are trying to welcoming everyone without any difference. I think it's the most inclusive space that you can really find in technology right now, and creative in all the industry, honestly. So it's just really, it's amazing to be here.
Great. Thank you so much. I need to wrap up right now, but there are a lot of other questions I do, as Marco said, recommend reaching out on Twitter and just kind of talk. I think the community is just so lovely in terms of you can just go on Telegram groups and ask people around as advice. So, and sometimes, funnily, when we're having hosting these panels, I notice people just create their communities on the YouTube chat. Like in previous talk, they were sharing Instagram accounts with each other. And I was just like, what's happening here? Like making this panel and like literally people kind of creating a mini CSM NFT blockchain community. So that's very exciting. And I'm very looking forward to that. So thank you so much to all of you for sharing your time with us. And I wish you all an amazing evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.